keegi ei oska mitte üldse inglise keelt? Kõik saavad enam aru. Okay.
Juba raskas Blenderis toimetada võiks ju.
Täpselt. So I guess I could try to do it in English. My English is very broken, so sorry. But point is that we want to make some rocks that we can use in a particle system and spread them around some surface. And because the rocks are pretty much different, every rock is a little bit different, then it would be a good idea to make them procedurally. So we don't have to handcraft and hand model all the rocks. And we just make some base geometry. For example, a capsule looking thing. We throw some modifiers on top of them that deforms the surface. It moves the vertices around a little bit based on some sort of texture, for example this. And we do it many times with a little bit different settings, and we get a stone or rock looking geometry. And after that we combine it with some sort of procedural textures and make it look even more like a rock kind of thing. I hope this reminds you of some sort of rock. So, what is the basic shape we need to make a rock? What do you think? What should I pick from this list?
Cube.
Exactly. So pretty much the same thing why we didn't choose the UV sphere or the icosphere when we made the surface. Is that the cube has a very even topology. So if you would pick UV sphere, for example, UV sphere has a lot of triangles on top. So when we later add a subsurface modifier and start deforming it, like on top there will be many very narrow triangles, and that won't look very good. So to get as even topology as possible, just pick up a cube. We could do it with just a cube because the topology is the same, and later we will also add additional subdivision surface modifiers to get the appropriate amount of polygons. But just to kick us off, I guess we can add the subsurface modifier onto the cube and with like 3 maybe subdivisions, and then apply it. So we have like something to work with, because in the beginning like we have only 8 vertices, and that's not enough, nearly enough. So yeah, just add a subdivision surface modifier, maybe subdivisions level 3, for example. Apply it, and then when we go to the edit mode, we can see that we have many more vertices. Okay. Okay. Very good. Now. Okay. And to give us some sort of variation, I guess we could do like, like 2 or 3 variations where we hand model this geometry. Because the modifiers we use to deform the mesh, they aren't that flexible. I mean, we load some procedural texture and the modifier, and it deforms based on that texture. But if you want to get some really specific shape, like I don't know, make it like an L or something, then we still have to like hand model the rough shape, and then after we apply the modifier, then it like shows the surface of the stone rock, unless it's like smooth. So basically, if you want to make stones that are really specific shape, then you have to still hand model them a little bit. But let's just say that let's copy them. Actually, we don't need to copy it right away. We can do it after, because when we copy them now, then many of the modifiers are the same for both of the rock stones. So if we copy them after, the most of the modifiers are already there, and maybe it's a little bit faster. So okay, let's start with this one. First of all, you would probably also need to add the subdivision modifier, but this time we won't apply it because when we apply the modifiers that are like, for example, like 3 subdivision levels, and we apply it, then first of all the file size will get bigger, because we like physically have more vertex coordinates to write into the file. But currently, because it is a modifier, the modifier divides the geometry. It does it on the fly basically, so it doesn't have to write all the coordinates down into some file. So let's say only just 2 levels. And now we need to start deforming the shape somehow. And the deformation comes from a modifier called displace. So basically, when we add the displace modifier, then by default it just grows a little bit. But that's because it doesn't have any, it has a strength of 1, and it doesn't have any like data how to deform the geometry. So it deforms based on some sort of texture, for example here. You could also like paint the texture in Photoshop or somewhere and then load it in here. That also works. But because we just want some random noise basically, we could use a procedural texture. So currently the texture is just new. We could press new, it would add texture, but we can't see the texture settings anywhere in here. Also, we can't see them in the node or textures panel, nothing's here. And the way it works is that we have to press this button. It says show texture in texture tab. So basically, if you use cycles render, pretty much the only time you have to use the texture panel in here is when you are changing some sort of textures that are input in modifiers or particle systems, basically. So when we click this button, you are brought to the texture panel, You can do it manually, you don't have to press this button. You can also just click the texture tab and choose what kind of texture you want to modify from the drop down menu. So basically there are some sort of brush masks. These ones you probably don't have, but any kind of modifier or maybe also particle systems that you can use textures in, those will show up in here. So basically when I look at the modifier, it's written like texture 003. I could use like change name for whatever, but basically you can see the same name in here. So it displays it's displays modifier, it's under modifiers and the texture 003. And by default it also in the type it wants to load in some sort of image texture, but we don't have any image texture. So what we can do is change the type and use the other ones. So basically besides the environment map, the image or movie, the point density and voxel data, I think, and the rest of them are procedural textures. So basically if I just choose clouds, for example, it generates this sort of noise texture based on some numbers, and it's basically like infinitely large, or it just calculates as many of the pixels as you need. And if you scroll down a little bit, for example, it's a spaces, like there are many different formulas what you can use to calculate this noise. It's like the type is clouds, but there are many different ways to calculate this cloud looking noise. So I guess you can check them out, just click them and see what changes from the preview. How does it look like? Many of them are pretty much the same, at least they look the same. For example, like the cell noise is very different. It has very hard edges and stuff, or the crackle. And also there are some settings you can change, like the size. Depth, like basically adds some details. Now there are like fewer lines than with the depth of 1, for example. And it kind of like overlays these different noise patterns. So yeah, but you can't really change the strength of the displacement, because if you look, then all the vertices are like displaced somewhere around here. So even if you change some settings, it doesn't really change how far the vertices are like moved. So the overall strength of the effect is that you can still change from the modifier. So here is strength. Probably it should be less than it is by default. So I guess if you want to make some lava looking rocks or something, then this type of texture might be appropriate. But for a smoother rock, I guess it's something like this. And this is only the first level. So if you like look at some sort of textures or surfaces, then usually you can see that there are many, you can like categorize many different levels of detail basically. So the first displacement modifier should give us the basic shape of the rock stone. probably could be like stronger the effect, and because we don't have so many vertices to work with, it should probably be the texture. It should probably be like larger. So if you don't have many vertices and you make the texture really small, then you can't really see the detail. Because for example, like maybe some in the middle of this polygon there should be some sort of detail on the texture at least, but we can't see it because we don't have any vertices. So for example, let's make like 3 levels of detail. First is very large texture. The strength should be like pretty high, I guess. We can change some settings here. Just pick whatever you feel is like the right settings. You can change like all of them later, so it doesn't have to be like perfect. So for example, this one. Let's say I'm happy with this. It gives like the basic shape, but we need to add some detail in here, because I haven't seen any stones that aren't like polished, that look like this in nature basically. It's like perfectly smooth currently. So we add probably another subdivision surface modifier to give us more vertices. For example, level 2. And then we add another displacement modifier. And for this one we of course use another a different texture, not with these settings. So new, show it in texture tab. And so this should be a lot smaller, so you can see the tiny details. And also it should be a lot weaker, so it doesn't displace the vertices as much. So we scale down the strength, maybe like this. And then we add the medium details, maybe in like smaller, and maybe even weaker. 0.1. So you can see the medium details like add a lot to the whole image. It might be enough, it might not be enough. It really depends like how far do you see this object. So if it's further away, you might not need as many details when you are like really up close. But just for the exercise, I guess we can add like the third level also. So we add another subdivision surface modifier, and also we add another displace modifier. A texture that's even smaller, basically. you might find that it gets a little laggy. Then maybe you have added too many details, because this is only like one rock, but in the end we will have like many different ones. So we should make it weaker. Something like this maybe. And because you will have many of these in the end, it's probably best to, under the subtle surf modifier, there's like view and render levels. And it's probably wise to take the view and make it a little like just, you can I guess just put it in 0, so you can't actually see this displacement in the viewport. But when you render the final image, then it uses the render levels, and then you can see the full detail. But just for if you are happy with level 2, for example, like, let's say this detail is enough, and I don't have to like worry about this rock anymore, I can just make these view levels 0, and then my computer won't lag as much, because later we will have like many of these one. And I guess you could now copy it. You can duplicate this one we have made. Yeah, I guess the location doesn't really matter, but by default they are of course the same exactly. Then you can maybe in 8 mode, you can maybe like deform it a little bit by hand, scale it like up, or maybe like bend it somewhere. And if you want like smoothly model this thing, I guess you could use just sculpt mode, and for example like crab, you can just sculpt it around, not too much though. Or if you don't want to use sculpt mode, you can use the proportionating from here. So basically if you have like, for example, this vertex selected, use proportionating enabled, and when you start moving this one vertex, I have only one selected, but when you have this proportionating enabled and you start like rotating or scaling or moving it, then the influence, then there's like this white circle and the influence is inside the circle. So basically there's a fall off of the strength of the transformation you're making. For example, like if I'm moving it, I know like 1 unit up, then the rest of the vertices that are in the circle also get transformed. And you can change the size of the circle by scrolling the mouse wheel. So I guess I could just make some this looking page geometry. Like that. And of course you can just change the settings in the modifiers, because they are like independent of each other now. What you can't change are the, well, can But if you change the texture settings, then it changes also on the other stone. So if I change the size, then you can see that both of the copies are changing. Because by default, when you make a copy, then textures and materials and stuff, they're linked. So basically, if I, for example, for this texture, like put like small details, for example, and if I pick the other stone, this one also under the display modifier. As you can see by the name, it uses exactly the same texture. So when I change some settings in here, it also changes on the other object. So when you want to break like the connection, then there should be a little number next to the name. Now it says 2, so basically it means that 2 objects are using exactly the same settings, the same texture. So when you want to make different looking textures settings, just click the number 2. It renames the texture because like 2 different textures with the same name that can't happen basically. So all the textures have to have different names. As you can see now, one is small details and the other one is small details 0, 1. So basically that means that they aren't linked or connected anymore. And now if I change some settings, then it doesn't affect the other one. Yeah, but the modifiers aren't linked. You can't link basically modifier settings. You can copy the modifiers over, but you can't link the settings. Actually, that might be a good thing to know. Like when you are making for example, you want to use some other object, not the cube you started off. I'll make a cube, but let's just say it's some other kind of object. And I want to transfer the modifiers from one object to another. That you can do in the object menu. So for example, if I want to add these modifiers that are here to this object, also the selection is important, like what to select first and what to select last. Basically you should select last object you want to take the modifiers from. I hope it was this way. So basically, if I want to take modifier from here, I select it last, and in the object menu there is make links, and there you can see all the different kinds of data you can link between objects. So for example, you can transfer UV maps if the topology is the same, or groups or materials or something. But there's also modifiers. Pick modifiers. Then the other copy also changes. It takes over all the modifiers that were on the first one. So yeah, basically they make links. It's also sometimes very useful. And because you are like selecting the object you want to take the modifiers from last, it means that if you have many different objects, and you want to add this same modifiers to all of them, then you can just pick all the others, pick the ones you want to take the modifier from last, make links, modifiers, and they are all the same. Let's maybe just make a third rock also with some different settings. Maybe that should be enough. Because in the particle system, the rocks are also like rotated and scaled and moved around. So even if you have like 3 rocks, it probably won't. We probably won't see the repetition, even if there are like so few. So let's say 3 is enough. So we basically just duplicate, move it a little bit, change some settings, and you have a third rock. I guess the easiest way is just to invert some settings, and it will probably look a lot different.
mis Nahla teeb? selle filmi tekstuuri checking ajal?
Minu meelest enamasti ei suurt midagi. See on ka mingisugune number, mida kasutatakse selle tekstuuri arvutamiseks. Size of the relative offset used for normals. Peaks natuke seda kuidagi muutma. Ja ma olen väga palju tekstuuride puhul otseselt midagi nagu visuaalselt vähemalt muudab. Okay, so everyone has some sort of geometry, like looks kind of like some sort of rock looking thing. Okay. So we have the surface, the geometry, but now we should also make some sort of material, because actually like probably most of the look of the rock comes from the actual texture, not so much from the shape itself. So if you will like add some sort of gray material on this thing, it doesn't really look very much like some sort of rock. Maybe painted rock or something. Because like when you're modeling and texturing and you like think about how much of the details you should model and what you should give the texture. So usually when you look at the silhouette of the object and you want to make the silhouette really detailed, like that's the things you should model. But if you want to make some details you can't really see from the edge, then probably those you should make it in texture or in the material. So by default we don't have any materials on the object. Of course you need the nodator. You could use the material panel from here, but because the material probably gets a little complicated, then it is really difficult to like get an overview in here. So for example, this is a rock material, I guess, and these nodes contain also some sort of nodes. So in here you can kind of see like what's what and how it is connected and what are the different parts of the material. But in the material panel, it's like a hierarchy or some sort of hierarchic tree, I guess, because in the beginning there is also like only pretty much two shaders, some sort of factor. But if you start like picking it apart, there are many different levels in here. So in this way you can't really follow along like what's connected to what and how. Like gets really confusing really fast. So usually the nodator is a lot better for this kind of thing. You probably won't make it as complicated as this one. Let's just keep it as simple as possible. But like even in here there is some sort of repeating pattern, just with different settings. Pretty much all the nodes the same, but with a little bit of different settings. So the main part, of course we want to use procedural textures, because when we use some sort of bitmap color texture, then of course we have to unwrap the model and then there probably will be some sort of seams, seam somewhere. But when we use the procedural materials, textures, then we don't have that problem. So okay, let's make a new texture. And the main part is just texture called noise. Noise. So this is pretty much the only texture you need to use to make some sort of rock-looking material. Yeah, I only use noise texture also in the example. Yep, just noise. And from the later versions of Blender, now you can see the procedural textures also in the material shading. So you don't have to really render the whole thing. So like even if I just use the nose texture, it also already like looks a lot better if it's like only like plain color. But we probably want to also use different levels of detail also in the textures. So it's not all like high, really detail, like really small. There are probably also like some larger scale, like bigger scaled variations, maybe in color or in the values. Like some areas are darker and others are brighter and so on. I also want to think, if you use procedural textures, then you should also probably change the texture coordinates, because by default it uses the generated coordinates. Like if I connected the generated textures in here, nothing changes, because if it doesn't have any connections, it uses the generated by default. And that can be bad, because when I, for example, scale the object, then also the texture gets like stretched if you use the generated coordinates. Even if it's not in like in object mode, even if it's in edit mode, it still gets stretches. So what you should use, the node is in under input and texture coordinates. Input texture coordinates. You should use the object coordinates, because the generated one like stretches the 0 to 1 space basically takes into account the shape of the object, but this one doesn't. So even if I like scale it, not in object mode, but in edit mode, then the texture is still the same. It's not like scaled only in one direction. So yeah, basically just if you use procedural textures, then just use the object coordinate. Object coordinates. So I guess the logic is kind of the same as with the modifiers, displaced modifiers. The point is that we make larger details in the beginning, like this sort of large scale variation, and then we start adding detail. And we do it by using the color mix node. So if I edit the texture, no not texture, color, yeah, mix RGB with this node, we can combine different texture basically. So we need at least two things to combine. So let's just make a copy of this thing. Shift and V makes a copy. And we can combine them with the mix shader, mix texture, mix node. And also from the noise texture, I guess you should use factor, not color, because the color is like all different kinds of colors. I probably don't want that. And I guess there is many different ways to do it, but for example, we could just mix colors, not these textures actually. For example, I can use this noise texture as a mask basically. So some areas are darker, some are lighter. So basically I can use this texture as a mixing factor for this node. And to make them the colors easier to pick, you could use under input, I think it was. Input and RGB. So basically it gives you a color wheel that you can plug into the mix shader. And the noise texture you use for the mix factor. So basically the noise texture determines where is, like, for example, red and blue. So wherever there is a like brighter spot on the noise texture, it loads in the bottom of the mix color, and where it is darker, it loads the upper one. So yeah, you could use it as a mix factor, the texture. And of course, if you want to make a realistic kind of looking rock stone, then you want to use red and blue. You would use like some other colors, darker maybe. grayish, brownish tingides. Yeah, but now it looks awful, but when we start adding different kinds of layers on top, then it probably will look better. So basically, yeah, you are mixing two colors based on the noise texture. So when you want to add next level, so let's say it is like the biggest level of detail on the texture, and then you just need another nice texture node and mix node. It actually also colors, so you can just copy the whole thing. But now we won't use two colors, we just use one. Because we need to like connect all of these nodes up. From the previous mix, we just connected to the first mix under the first color. So now it blends the previous result with the new color. And so we can change the color a little bit, maybe make it darker or something. We can change, of course, the noise texture, make it a little smaller. Now we have like the bigger details. Now and then even smaller details. So yeah, basically the important thing is the variation of color and the scale of the texture. So maybe not so brownish looking. Yeah, and also for this one, I guess we can add like 3 levels. So make one more copy, connect it up, change some settings, color. And if it looks like some level is like too overwhelming, or if I change the last settings, you can see that a lot changes. Like the last texture affects the surface a lot, but the first one, if I change something in here, simple color, then it like affects the texture less. And if I, for example, want to decrease the effect of the last color or the last noise texture, then what I can do is basically I want to affect the factor, the noise texture, and I could use the color ramp for changing the fall off basically. The color ramp is under converter. And if I make it brighter basically, no, I make it darker. If I change the texture so it would look a little darker. Because again, if from the mix factor the darker tones are the upper input and the brighter ones are the lower. So if I want to decrease the effect of the lower one, I have to make the overall texture darker. So from the color ramp, if I change this color darker, then the effects of this color basically will be less. Basically I have a control over how much of the effect I can see. So yeah, let's say we had like three levels of detailing here. And you could add as many as you like, just keep repeating this step over and over with a little bit of different settings.